What's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's edition of the On Purpose podcast, where you know it's our mission to show up each and every week to get you moving, get you thinking, get you questioning your life and the lives around you and challenging the status quo. And this week, I'm super excited to be joined by Jenny Chan, the co-founder of Pacific Atrocities Education. Her work began when she discovered her grandmother's wartime of artifacts and realized how much of what she had learned through our school system was not reflective in the history that her family experienced. And you guys know I love history. I love studying things, but I also love questioning things. And I'm super excited to get Jenny on here to share what she learned about her family, what we can learn from her, and more importantly, what we don't want to forget. So, Jenny, welcome to the On Purpose podcast, my friend. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a privilege to be here and to get to share your story. And I want to start by thanking you for choosing to share your story and not to let it remain silent, but be in public with it so we can all learn from it. Because I think the greatest way to not repeat history is to make sure we don't forget about it to begin with.
Yes, I think so. And also, what is never again when the first time was never learned? So yeah, and it's interesting that like when I was in school and we were learning about World War II, we just really learned about like 90% Hitler, and then we watched a movie about Pearl Harbor. And I didn't even realize that Pearl Harbor and the occupation of Hong Kong were actually the same war, really. And and so that's what got me interested in like learning more about World War II in like Asia and whatnot.
I'm excited, Jenny, to learn from you and to hear what your family experienced. But before we do, I got a series of warm up questions for you. I like to get us thinking, get us moving, get everybody ready to go. So, are you ready for your warm up questions?
Sure.
All right, Jenny, what's something you've learned about yourself lately?
I learned that I need to be more patient. I've been dealing with bureaucrats in terms of like, filing these paperwork, and I called every day and they're like, "Oh, Miss Chan, you need to stop calling. We're already on." And I'm like here with like my blood pressure high, I'm like, "Oh, why can't they get this done already?" But yeah, I need to be more patient.
I love it. What's a small habit or ritual that's been giving you energy lately?
Walking my dog, I think my dog is more like my part of life now. And I'm so grateful to have such an incredible dog too. Like, I think my dog just like feeds off of my energy too. Like, if I'm feeling sad, I can see his face. He's kind of like sad. If I'm like feeling I was like just kind of under this like really fog of sickness, and he would just like lay next to me, like while I'm in bed. He's like laying on the floor. I'm just and like believe it or not, I found like a purebred German Shepherd on the side of the road, and that's what I have. And it's so incredible to have like it's such a I feel like my dog is an empath. It's so good to have such a I feel very blessed to have such a incredible, well behaved dog.
Yeah, that's good. And you rescued him? You found him, huh?
Yeah, he was dying from parvo.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But here he is. He's healthy.
That's good. You got to walk him after we're done with this today, huh?
Yeah, exactly. It's beautiful today. I don't want to like, waste the sunshine. He's probably upset that I haven't walked him yet.
All right. I mean, who's someone in your life that's a bit inspiring or influencing your thinking lately?
I have been reading a lot of books lately. I think Mearshmeyer. I don't know if you read his like thing on like hegemony. What's his name? What's his name? John Mearshmeyer, I think, is one of the very interesting like books that I've been reading. I'm reading his late one of his books about why leaders lie, and it's very illuminating. And he has a lot of books on like hegemony and also like especially now that we're so involved in so many like regional fights in America right now, that I'm just like, wow, this is I need to learn about like the reasoning for this. And so yeah, I've been learning from a lot from him.
What's been one of the things you've learned or takeaways that you're like, oh, I hadn't thought of that?
Yeah, that leaders are always going to lie to their people. It's you think that it's going to be a foreign leader who lied to you, but it's actually like 9 out of 10 times that the domestic leader is more likely to lie to its own people than a foreign leader is lying to other people.
Really? What's he saying the reason for that is?
So because like for example, in the democracy, you really need your people's support to, for example, go into a war. So, and also like if you're campaigning and you're saying like, oh, we're going to have a war with certain country, then people are not going to vote for you. So you have to promise people low prices, peaceful time, blah blah blah, in order to get elected. Then you just kind of do whatever you want.
Yeah, that makes sense. Unfortunately, we fall for it all the time, huh?
Yeah, exactly. We just fall for it all the time. And, we were promised cheap gas. Now gas is like, you live in an RV, so you can really feel the gas
Yeah,
prices, right?
that's why I don't come to California. You guys' gas is crazy.
Yeah, I know. I just passed by a gas station yesterday. It was like 6.49.
No, yeah, well, I mean, we're in Arizona right now. It's still expensive, but yeah, you just don't travel as much. You just slow down.
How much is it now in Arizona?
Diesel is like 5.20 a gallon.
Shit.
Yeah, not what you guys are paying.
Oh yeah, we're paying a lot more, I think. At least a
Yeah,
dollar more. Yeah, gotta slow down, I think.
yeah. All right, Jane. One
Mm.
last warm-up question for you. When you think about the season you're in this phase of stage of your life, what word or phrase best describes it?
The phase of my life. I think it's somewhat more transitional. I think, but I think every phase of life is very transitional. Like you change a little bit. I mean, I'm like you live in an RV, so you get that, you go to a different pace or like go through a bit different like thing. And I feel like because our nonprofit is so small that we're always doing kind of different things and trying out different ways of like doing things. And so then I feel like, we're always transitioning, but in a way, we're transitioning and growing at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that's true. Life is always about transitioning. I mean, it really never stays the same.
Yeah, I mean, think about it, right? Like right now, I almost feel like the whole country is transitioning. Maybe when I just look at the gas price, I feel like, wow, it's so crazy. I mean, and it's just like, we just don't know what's gonna happen tomorrow. And yeah, it's definitely a little bit of a sense of uncertainty.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, to go back to your earlier answer, the fact we were told all these other things versus what's really happening is that's probably the most disheartening thing. And honestly, one of the reasons why I think your lessons are so important is because we're not always told the truth, what they say versus what they do, and we can't forget our past.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
So let's talk about that, Jenny. Talk to me about because you're right. Like as I was preparing for our conversation, I know so much about World War II in the European theater because it was most of the movies. It was what we were taught in school, and I learned so much just getting ready for our conversation. I hadn't even thought about in Asia and the Asian theater. So talk to us about your early encounters with your family history and how it wasn't matching up to what you were being taught in school.
Yeah, so It's interesting because my grandma would always get so upset about like if I watch anime, for example, or like if I'm reading manga, comic books, and she would tell me that these Japanese people are evil, and I would be like, oh, there's no way. And I was just thought that she was going through some kind of senile period of her life. and, and I kind of like ignore what she was saying, and but she wasn't upset if I'm watching like Winnie the Pooh. She's upset about like certain anime, like Japanese anime. And so then when she passed away, I found like her stuff, her military yen, and also like the rice rationing coupon, and I realized that what she was saying probably had some like uh there were some legs on what she was saying. And then I read more about it, and like I had a really boring job, so I was reading The Rape of Nanking and like The Rising Sun by John Tolan. And yeah, it's very interesting like what you learn when you start reading about history, especially. And also like my my education, I think, has only been about like 90% of it is like Holocaust. And then like we watched one movie on Pearl Harbor, and I didn't even realize that Pearl Harbor and like what my grandma was describing were like the same war. and so and so and so it's just interesting that like we learn little lessons in history, but then we don't learn like the big picture.
Mm. What was your grandma specifically telling you about, or what were the artifacts did she have for you?
Well, when I was a kid, she would tell me like things like, "Oh, I remember I really wanted. Oh, I like watching like samurai anime," and she would be like, "Oh, these Japanese people were like chopping people's head." And if you're a kid, you're not going to be like, "Oh, tell me more." You
Right.
just want to watch your little cartoon. And then when I found her like rice rationing coupons and also like military yen, and I googled more about the military yen. It was like people were forced to trade whatever they owned into like whatever money they had into this like military yen, which then became like nothing after the war. And so it was like inflating throughout the war, but then by the end of the war it had like it was worth nothing. And so for I think it's that's something that and the fact that she kept like a whole box of it, even like decades after the war, she probably was holding on to like the hope that one day it will be worth something again. So just living that kind of like time, I think, and also like facing that kind of brutality on a daily basis, right? Like if she was telling me on passing that people's heads were being chopped off, I think it must have meant a lot in terms of like her traumatic experience.
And so your grandma was in Hong Kong during World War II?
Yes.
Okay. And for the community members that are listening, not up on World War II history or maybe lacking a little bit or forgotten. So Japan invaded Hong Kong.
Yes, right after Pearl Harbor, like 8 hours after Pearl Harbor, because if you look at a map,
Yeah.
Hawaii is actually pretty close to Hong Kong. And so, like, by Christmas time, by December, that Christmas time, Hong Kong was then handed to Japan.
So what did finding these materials make you want to learn?
More about like my family history and also what had happened in Asia, because this is something that we haven't learned before in, I mean, at least in my classroom setting. And so then it kind of and when I was then reading like The Rising Sun and whatnot, I realized that my grandma's experience was not unique, in the sense that like 30 million other people died. That's like the low estimate of in Asia, and that her experience was pretty common. And that's kind of the experience that I kind of dismissed. And we think about World War II in terms of like 1941 or like, 1939 to 1945. But in like, and then Hong Kong was occupied between 1941 to 1945. But before that, like even 10 years before Pearl Harbor, if we just swing it back a little bit, there was also the Manchuria that was occupied by Japan 1931 until 1945. And so then, and those people in Manchuria experience kind of what my grandma experienced. And this is like millions of people who have experienced this kind of, wartime occupation and whatnot. And we never learn about it. And so I started getting more interested, and I realized that like the Quantum Army that had occupied Manchuria was then like was the like was the leading force in why Japan had occupied Manchuria in the first place. But there was no literature on the Quantum Army. They might talk about that in like a little chapter of a book, but then there's not really a big, huge chunk of literature on it. And so our organization actually researched and published the first book on it, about Quantum Army.
Really? And what did you learn in your research for that?
That so in what we learn about China in terms of like Chinese history is there's like a huge gap. You learn about the Opium War and then you learn about the rise of Mao. There's like this huge gap. And I learned that there must be a reason for that, because during this time of China, it was like a warlord era. Basically, every warlord that controlled different parts of China were then funded by foreign governments, and then the foreign governments were trying to basically take control of different parts of China, or like back different warlords into taking this piece of land. And because it's big enough that they believe that they can slice it into melon. And what I learned is that it's actually very similar if you think about it, like the Middle East. It's almost like warlord era in China if you think about it. Um, and it's very interesting to think about, because we need to learn from history to know about what's happening today.
Yeah, I think we also got to question what we're being told,
Yes.
right? Not just learn it and accept the facts someone tells you is the facts as they are, but understand those are interpreted facts by one side.
Yes. And I think that, like, for example, I was researching about Unit 731, which was like this biological weapons program. And everyone knows about Auschwitz, right? Like, we all know about Joseph Mengele, but then we never learned about Unit 731. And I realized that there's a reason for it. It's because, like, after the war, the scientists had made like kind of an immunity deal with the American government, and they basically got payout, and they were never really prosecuted. Um, so that's why like there's like victor's justice, and then there's also this kind of justice where they trade for their own. So even though that Japan didn't win, a lot of their people were able to trade for immunity deal with the victor.
So talk to me, what was Unit 731? What was that?
Yeah, Unit 731 was basically a biological weapons program that was happening in Japan occupied Manchuria, and they were doing biological uh, research basically on humans. And so they would capture like Chinese, Russians, because Manchuria is so close to Russia, and like Koreans, and then they would do like vivisection on them. Vivisection is like doing human experimentation uh without anesthesia, because they believe that if you use anesthesia, they would it will dumb down the germs. And so then they were doing research on like, pressure chamber to see how to develop airplanes so then the pilots can survive, certain kind of maneuvers in terms of G-force. They were also like tying victims to stakes and then like just basically on the ground, the anti-testing ground to see how to develop these like ceramic flea bombs. Um, and so then they were like breeding rats so then they can have fleas, and then the fleas would get like plague, and then they would put it in these ceramic flea bombs. And at one point they were like incentivizing people to like raise rats so then they can breed more fleas. And then they also, do testing on like syphilis. They would force like a pregnant woman to, they would force like a captured human experimentation kind of person, and then they would like put syphilis in him, infect him with syphilis basically, and then like force him to rape a pregnant woman to see if the syphilis would pass. And then they were also like testing anthrax and like glanders and the plague. And yeah, it was that kind of experimentation that was happening in World War II in Asia.
And the Japanese were doing that?
Yeah, the Japanese were doing that.
This is crazy. And did you find so one of the things I love about your mission is I read it somewhere like is not to accuse, it's just to document what we know already happened, right? And that's
Yeah.
one of the things you guys are digitizing over 1 million pages of archival material. So like this stuff you're talking about, you're finding documentation for that, and you're helping preserve it so that people can study it in the future.
Yes.
What's that emotionally? What's that been like for you, Jenny, to find stuff
Yeah, that's a good
and
question.
be like, man, these are human beings that are treating like science experiments. Like, what has that been like for you to sit and weigh and ponder, especially with knowing that like my grandma was talking about this, but I didn't know.
Yeah. I think for me, it comes up with a lot of like ethics and also like science advancement questions in terms of like we live in like this day and age where we're going to, we talk about science a lot. We talk about science advancement a lot. We talk about how science is going to advance our society, but then we don't talk about like how science without ethics can go. Just like Unit 731, the chief, the director, Ishishiro, read the Geneva Convention and was like, wow, this is, if they need to like come up with ways to harness, to rule germs, that means that germs must be so powerful that I should be able to use it to like win this, to help Japan to win this war. And so it kind of is like, it then it emotionally, I'm wondering like how far can human beings go in terms of like winning, and what does it mean to even win, when you have to go through all this kind of cover up, and also there's so much sacrifice in this like so-called winning. And at first it was pretty gross like detailed, and I was thinking like, man, this is disgusting. And but like once I look past through like what was happening, I realized that we don't talk about it, but like people who have been experimented on, right? There was no survivor. And so we need to talk about that more so then things like that don't happen to other people again.
So how have you processed it, knowing? I guess that's my that because that's the thing. Like sometimes we it's not that we don't know or that we don't realize it happened, but it's heavy, right? Like it's heavy stuff, it's dark stuff. So we'll just pretend like we don't see it and continue life over here. But when
Right.
you read it and you're like, okay, I'm gonna document this. I'm not only that, I'm gonna create an organization that helps create a place where people can come to read what took place. What's that
Right.
what's that been like for you to work through yourself?
I think it became some kind of life purpose for me to talk about this. In because when I was after I was working at this really boring job, and like, and that's how I started like reading these history books. And then I'm like, wow, why is there, and then I was trying to look for a job that would like, maybe I can become an analyst or something at like an organization that talks about this. But then like there was no organization that talked about it, you know? And then I was like, well, why don't I go find an organization? Like, why don't I create one so then we can continue talking about this? Like, so it's not just like, you know, in a few books that no one read in the last, you know, 5 years or whatever, we can continue and have this kind of dialogue and like talk about, you know, this part of history, that these hidden atrocities that really no one talk about, and make sure that history doesn't repeat.
Yeah, that's such a big thing, man. And that's one of the things that scares me a lot of times is we're quick to forget where we've been because we're trying to get to where we're going so fast and we make the same mistakes over and over.
Yeah. And and it's also interesting too, because if you think about it, right? Nowadays people are talking about AI this and AI that. And if for in a way, it kind of reminds me of like, you know, Unit 731. And also at that time, everyone was talking about like biological weapon and like, you know, biological research this, biological research that, because Ishishiro, the director of Unit 731, was able to raise so much money that it became this kind of like obsession for all these scientists who were going through school and who were learning like what had happened, you know, how Ishishiro raised so much money. It almost reminds me of this like AI race that we have today.
Yeah.
How like technocrats can then, you know, raise and to get to wherever they want to go to make money, and then to not hear about what happened to humanity in the future.
Mm. I think that's such a good point, Jenny, right? Like, because we don't forget our past, because we can learn what happened in the Pacific, doesn't mean that knowledge only helps us to avoid doing the exact same thing in the future. It
Yeah.
literally can draw parallels to like, wait, I saw traits, I saw human behaviors towards each other in the Pacific here. I'm seeing that again now with the AI revolution, right? You start to see patterns in how we take advantage of each other and how groups can be marginalized or victimized. And I think
Yes.
that's more important. That's the reason we don't want to forget where we've been.
Exactly. And I also find it so interesting that like the immunity deal, because like I understand, you know, if you just kind of brush over it and whatnot, but then like the immunity deal was what bugged me the most about this research, because like they sent like multiple scientists to go look at what Japan was doing over the war. And at the end of the day, like these scientists like Norbert Fell, from like Fort Detrick, was then like, oh, what they were doing is like not something that we cannot do in peacetime US. And so let's just buy this from, like, you know, formerly our enemy, even though that they cross a moral line. And the moral line was obviously drawn for a reason, right? But because the research already existed, then they just buy it. Like, what, like, I struggle with that thought a lot. What do you think? Like, if that research is already there, should someone just go and purchase it and then use it for their own institute and whatnot?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's crazy, right? Because you got Huntsville, Alabama, where they basically brought the Nazi scientists over as well to take advantage of their knowledge and the expertise they had while ignoring the ties they had to what they had done over there. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think Jenny is interesting, right? Because we want to think like that could never happen today, because we would stand up for ourselves and we wouldn't let other people be treated like that. But then I always go, would we? Would you really? Because I
I
see
don't
things
know.
happen, and then I'm like, are we standing up for things? Or are we just being like, oh, it's just what politicians do?
Yeah, I don't think we're standing up, and like even with with so much of social media, for example,
Hmm.
I feel like it gets led to like a wrong direction even, right? Like, Israel's doing whatever to Gaza, and then now we're pointing our thing at like targeting like kind of the Jewish population. And I was just saying that like if I telling my friend that if I was Jewish and I go on social media today, I would like I'll be like, oh my gosh, what should we're not able to stop a government's like action, but then we point it at like, we cast blame on like a wider population. Does that make sense? And
Sure.
so I feel like we like scapegoat a population, but then we're not able to stop our government. And it's interesting because like sure we can criticize our government and whatnot, but what good does it do at the end of the day?
Well, that's a good question. It does nothing if we keep voting them in. If
Well,
we,
but then it doesn't sound like even voting them is going to like be any different now because different lobbies and different
yeah.
interest groups are going to buy both sides. They're going to hedge their bets, and so I think at this point we can just learn from history, but then like after we learn from history, what is the next part, right? Like can we influence our government in any certain way? Like how can that even be applied for? And now I'm at this phase where I'm just like, let me just focus on my family and like do my research and
Yeah.
and focus on the good in life.
Well,
It's just
I think
yeah.
that's a thing, Jenny, because there is so much good in the world, and there is so much good around each of us if we actually stop and look for that and we
Yeah.
pay attention to it. But to your point earlier, social media, politicians, they're never going to tell you how good things are around you. They're only going to tell you what to be afraid of, what to be scared of, who to not like, who to like, because
Yeah,
that is
exactly.
good.
And I think, especially in this age of AI, we should never outsource our thinking to AI. I
Mm.
think, yeah, I think we need to really read and think for ourselves and like analyze.
So, yeah, let me ask you that. I think that's a great point for sure. Let me ask you, so how do you, like, I guess, how is your approach in gathering these documents and the evidence of what took place? What are you hoping the younger generations get from that?
Yes. So that's a great question. We have had like last year, we've had like high school students reach out to us about enrolling in National History Day for about Unit 731. And um and they won first place in New Mexico, and they were telling me that like their judges who were like history experts had no idea what Unit 731 was, and they didn't think to win. They just wanted to kind of raise awareness of what had happened in World War II in Asia. And um and I think it's interesting because like doing this work, not only do I get to like kind of work on my life's purpose on like finding and documenting and also like making this part of history accessible, but I can also influence like what young people were doing in terms of like their history projects. And also like it's just it's just very encouraging to see what young people are very open-minded and they want to learn more. And it's great to see them stumbling on our like website and our social media and to like learn more about global perspective and about global history.
So, how do we balance global perspective with local action?
Yeah, that's a great question too. Like I was saying about governments earlier, we can criticize,
Right.
but there's nothing is going to change. But I mean, I think like be kind to your neighbor.
There
That's
you
like
go.
one thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's like one thing, right? Like, look out for one another. If you see a different weird, license plate going into your neighbor's house, call them. Let them know.
Yeah.
I
Exactly.
mean, in a sense, like, don't be afraid to be called Karen because your neighbor might be like, oh shit, my house was almost robbed because my neighbor called me, I was able to check the security camera. Yeah, but like nowadays, because of social media, we're so afraid to be called Karen for some reason. But like, if I see like some weird, that's what happened to my aunt. My aunt was afraid to be called Karen, but she saw like a whole pickup truck like of guys just like going into her neighbor's like house, and she didn't call anyone.
Oh
And then
no.
it so happened that it was a group of men who were like of juveniles who were like robbing her neighbor's place. And then later she like spent the whole afternoon at the police station as a witness. And I'm like, well, have you called someone?
Uh, yeah, that's tough, right? That balance of when to get involved and when to mind your business. But I think what you said is absolutely right, Jenny. Like, I can be aware of what's happening around the world. I can have empathy and feel things for people around the world and what they're going through. But I can really like be kind to my neighbor and make their day. I can be kind to the people at the store. I can be kind to the people I interact with in my circle in person and maybe change their day for the better.
Yeah, exactly.
So what let me ask this and then we'll kind of move on. But why do you think the Asia Pacific atrocities are so underrepresented in our education system and what we teach our kids?
I think this Cold War narrative, it goes back to politics because then they need to like teach that China is bad during the rise of Mao, right? And so then, and it's so interesting to me too, because if you think about it, like Chinese people were excluded from this country. There was like anyone can come to this country at this point in 1882, except for the Chinese, right? And so then by 1882, Chinese were excluded. And then by the time Pearl Harbor happened, China is our number one ally. And then during Cold War, they're like, oh, we don't talk to these people again. We don't want to talk about these people, even though that they were like our wartime ally. I think it's just interesting to look at it in that perspective. And then from Cold War perspective, like they even went as far as to bringing like Nazi scientists into the U.S. for space program, right? And then they had a lot of things that like happened, like they even gave Japan, the Japanese scientists, immunity deal for Dietrich science program. And so then it kind of is like this continuation of like this narrative change. And like to your point earlier, like you need to be careful of what is being fed to us in narratives. And like for me, for example, I cannot trust anything that came out of the 70s. I feel like
Yeah.
there was a time when Cold War was going so strong that like if you read something from the 70s, you really need to like think about it twice.
Mm. That's such a good point, Jay. I hadn't even really thought about that, but you're right. It fits a narrative because
Yeah.
after World War II, Japan becomes our ally. So we
Yes.
don't want people to think negatively about their government, and China becomes the enemy again.
Right. And and I think it's also, yeah, the narrative perspective, and also like what gets painted as a villain, what gets painted as like good guys nowadays is really, it's really it's really scary, you know what I mean? Like we don't even know who are the good guys, who are the bad guys anymore, in a sense. And if you watch Marvel movies, right, like bad guys and good guys are always so like black and white, but then in reality, it's almost like everyone is kind of in a gray zone.
So as you study your work, Jenny, and as you gather documents, what do you see happening in today's world that reminds you of what you're reading and what you're gathering already?
Like I was saying earlier, scientific advancement without like ethics. And also like just the greed that leads to war, and also like this discrimination of like certain race or like people, that never goes away. Like as humans, we really like to like generalize a big group of people, and it's yeah. And also I learn more about the more I learn about governments, the more I'm just like I'm becoming a libertarian.
Nothing wrong with that.
It's just like, okay, so like in 1931, like the OSS already knew that they were doing human experimentation and whatnot, and they never did anything, right? And it's also interesting, like that, like our government knows so much, but then they don't tell us anything. Like in a way that almost reminds me of Epstein. Like our government already knew, but then they would redact it and keep it from us. It's just crazy.
So what is it? So your biggest race right now, as I read some of your stuff, is just trying to preserve documents before they deteriorate and they're no longer effective to read or to house. So where are you coming across these documents, and how do people, if they have stuff like this that would be of interest to your organization, how do they get it to you?
I actually go to the National Archives and scan a lot of those documents or primary sources, and a lot of the pages are very flicky because what we use in World War II are kind of like flicky compound paper. Like they just use whatever that they can find and make it into paper. Versus like even Civil War is more like cotton mixed paper. Um, and so even Civil War material is in better shape than than like things that we were scanning from World War II, and I find that very interesting. And so that was like our race to preserve a lot of these paper. And like I was talking to the National Archives, and because they have no funding, we send trillions and trillions to wars, but we have no funding to even preserve primary source documents, which then led to us like really fanatically scanning like a million pages. And when you go to like the National Archive, it's not like they put everything so neatly, like, hey, I just give you a topic and you go grab whatever for me. It's like, it's always such a struggle. They like, you can be trying to find something about POW, and then it could be either in the OSS file or like in whatever file. And like I was so naive the first time I went to the National Archives. I thought it will take me 2 weeks and then I can like already, walk out with a USB drive. And then they're like, no, that's not how we work. You need to buy a camera. You need to buy this kind of camera, and then you need to like scan it. And it ended up costing us like 6 trips to the National Archives to like scan things that are like related to biological research. And then I started putting in FOIA requests for Dietrich documents, and those are also like very frustrating because like 80% would get rejected, and like they would just be like, "Oh, this is still sensitive information." I'm like, "How can it be still so sensitive? It's like from the 1950s." And so yeah, it's just what like earlier what I said. I'm starting to become more of a libertarian just from just from dealing with bureaucrats.
Yeah. What do you think? So, for the community members, she's filing Freedom of Information Act request, right? Because we passed that law years ago that after a certain time, documents are eligible to be released, and you got to file a request to get them, and they're supposed to turn them over. So, that's
Sometimes it takes 2 to 3 years for them to scan through and to see if there's sensitive information.
from the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
That stuff's 80 years old now.
Yeah, and so even from that, you cannot get information from like 80 and whatever years ago. So what can you I mean, think about it. It's kind of a it's kind of difficult dealing with government, to say the least.
So, Jenny, what do you hope future generations learn from the work you guys are doing?
Um, I hope that they learn from like all sides of humanity. I mean, the good and the bad, and also like what had happened in Asia during World War II, because we never talk about it. And also learn about like who's crafting the narrative, what kind of political incentive is being done to craft this kind of narrative for people.
I think that's such a good question. That's one I honestly I wish I'd asked myself when I was younger learning is who benefits from me believing this story,
Right.
right? Like everybody that tells you a story, there's a benefit to them if you believe that story.
Exactly. Yeah,
And
and then, like, yeah, you need to really think about it because you can't trust. Like, I was reading recently about Operation Mockingbird. All these like news organizations are called entertainment because they actually don't push any real stories.
right,
They push this narrative and this bot and like CIA did a lot of terrible things in like the 60s and the 70s and even the 50s, and they don't talk about that in the news because CIA was sponsoring the news.
right. What was Operation Mockingbird?
Basically to have the media fit the narrative of the government, what the government wants people to believe.
Yeah, yeah. That's a whole
And
nother.
you read more into it, it's crazy. Like it's absolutely. I'm like, wow, I can't even turn on my news stories anymore because I'm like, I don't know if these people are bought and paid for. And that's why I listen to like podcasts like yours, because
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you're actually paid for by CIA. I hope not.
If I am, they need to pay me more, man. I need more. We need to renegotiate that contract. Well, Jenny, we appreciate. Let me ask you this as we get ready to wrap up, so you can get your dog for a walk. I don't want him getting too mad at you. When you think about the legacy of your work, what's most important to you?
I'm still young, so it's like hard for me to think about legacy and whatnot. But I think the truth about what had happened in history
Yeah,
is really important to me. And yeah,
the truth, what happened to you and families like yours and so many others. And I just want to thank you for the work you're doing, for the research you're putting into it, to the unbiased, like these are the documents, read for them what you want and draw your own conclusions approach you're giving, and for having the courage to share it all, to not just hold it to yourself, but to share it so that everybody else can learn from it as well.
yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, where can our audience connect with you, Jenny, and support the mission and learn what you're up to next?
Yeah, they can find us on pacificatrocities.org or on YouTube Pacific Front Untold.
All right, Jenny, thank you so much for joining us. Keep up the good work. I can't wait to continue to support you and see what you come up with next.
All right, thank you so much.